Hey, welcome to Wonderful Works Talks, where we talk all about the disability ministry mission of helping churches become accessible for all. I'm your host, Barb Stanley, and today we're going to talk about an important aspect of disability ministry, and that is disability parenting and marriage. Now, this is a really cool episode because it provides perspective-changing insights for both churches and couples themselves. But before we get to all of that, I want to stop and ask a question. When it comes to supporting families affected by disability, how often do we start by investing in marriages? Well, today, we're going to be talking about why investing in the marriages of couples who are parenting children with disabilities matters for everyone, what churches should know, and how couples can get started building a marriage that thrives, even when life feels hard. So we're so excited to welcome our guests from disabilityparenting.com, Todd and Kristin Evans. Todd and Kristin have just released a new book, How to Build a Thriving Marriage as You Care for Your Children with Disabilities. Welcome, Todd and Kristin.
Thanks for having us.
Hi, Barb. Thanks for having us.
So I just read your book, which is for parents of children who have disabilities, talking about marriage, which is something that a lot of times gets overlooked. Can you guys tell us a little bit about yourselves and why you wanted to write this book?
Yeah. So we've got two kids, 17 and 14-year-old. Our 14-year-old has a severe chromosomal deletion of the fifth chromosome, which impacts her overall developmental aspects and also her muscular aspects. So she's really like a 2-year-old. She's 14 now. And when we started 14 years ago, we struggled a lot with what it was like to raise this child that had all these different needs that we didn't feel equipped for. And our marriage in the midst of that started to crumble and just really go to a bad place where we weren't connecting, weren't able to talk. We became more of a partnership, not the way we wanted to live. So we kind of started a journey finding this pathway to get to a healthier marriage for ourselves and growing it until we finally got to a place where we just felt just joy and more happiness and connection in our marriage. And it just changed the way we could live life in general, but also the way we parented, the way we connected with one another, and just this amazing just joy that we discovered in the midst of it. So some opportunities opened up with COVID. Kristin had to quit her job and ended up deciding, let's try to help other families out. Yeah. And let's, we've kind of discovered this, let's share it with somebody else. So she started a blog and a mom's group to try to help with it. And it kind of developed into this idea, let's write a book. And so we started just brainstorming our own stories and our own experiences and saying, what's made it good? What do we have to work on? Where are the areas that we really had to challenge ourselves on and grow in over the last few years? So we took those. Then Kristin's a research nerd. She didn't mind me saying
I'm self-proclaimed.
Yes,
so, you can say that.
So she did all the research and kind of looked at literature and journal articles, things like that, worked with couples, asked questions about those kind of things. And we kind of put all that together in this book to try to have something fun, easy to read, some heartfelt stories in the midst of it, of challenges and joy both.
Yeah.
And just kind of give encouragement and hope and a path forward for families that just seem stuck.
Yeah. So you had said you were really struggling in the beginning when you were raising your daughter, and then you got to a path of joy. So I know there's a big story in between.
There's a lot of work. We're not going to lie.
Yeah.
Marriage is work to start with, but when you're facing all these additional stressors and the exhaustion and the grief, it just builds up to so many challenges and pressures on the marriage. And we just took baby steps. We started with one thing, and then we built that skill. And I was, in the meantime, learning skills in my personal therapy.
Right.
And we just started to learn more about what's normal as special needs parents. So we began to not feel like something was really wrong with us because of these struggles. It literally was a journey of deciding first we weren't going to keep just wandering in the wilderness, fighting against each other. We were going to clasp hands and move forward together.
Yeah, so I want to ask you a question. I grew up in a family affected by disability. My brother has autism, and this was very difficult on my parents' marriage. And of course, this was back in the 70s and 80s, 90s. There were no resources for marriages like this then, and my parents did end up getting divorced. But when I was reading your book, what really struck me is the importance of acknowledging grief and supporting each other in that. And I also noticed in your book, you talk about the difference between grief and chronic sorrow. And I thought that was so, so important to understand. Can you kind of explain what is the difference and why it matters?
That was one of the things that just about destroyed our marriage.
Yeah.
The grief and the chronic, more so not the acute grief. We did well,
Yeah.
as well as can
Yeah, the
be.
acute grief is like your initial diagnosis and finding
Mhm.
out, that kind of thing. So, like Kristen said, we did well with that. We grieved together. It was this big blow to us and things. But grief is one of those foundational pieces, I think, of that you have to work on and deal with, or you really can't move forward. You can be overwhelmed by it in the beginning, but then, as you said, there's this chronic grief that can keep
Mhm.
coming up over and over and over again throughout life, and it's triggered by everyday circumstances. It could be things like developmental milestones
Mhm.
that you're hitting,
Or not hitting.
or not hitting. Yeah,
Mhm.
we had eighth grade graduation for our daughter, about 2 weeks ago. Kristen and I really had to gear up for that, especially Kristen,
Mentally and emotionally, and
uh,
talk about it
Yeah.
beforehand.
to see that all these other kids are there, developing normally, going off to high school, and the adventures there, and our
Having
daughters.
parties, we're all wearing white dresses. And of course, we didn't get that memo
We're
because
not in those
we're
social
not in those
circles.
social circles. And
Yeah.
so it was very hard. And back when Bethany Grace was little, we did not understand what was going on. We
Right.
thought we've grieved, we're moving to acceptance.
Yeah.
God had seemed to move on. I
Mhm.
felt like something was wrong with me, that I was having these waves of grief when I went to
Yeah.
took her to the doctor's office, and there's healthy babies.
Yeah.
And it just overwhelmed me with grief. And so we did not honestly fully understand this concept until
Yeah.
we were researching for the book 2.5
Yeah.
years ago. And I had this aha moment of, oh my gosh, that's what was going on in our
Yeah.
marriage.
Yeah.
And and what was going on with me mental health wise. I
Yeah.
felt a lot of shame because
Yeah.
so that was a critical piece and we kind of stumbled through figuring that out, but we really
Yeah.
didn't have that concept until about 2.5 years ago.
Well, that's when I was reading your book. Yeah, that was really the first time I had thought of the difference and really hit me the impact that has on families affected by disability, because I think there is a lot of misunderstanding with people feeling like, oh, I should be better at this now. I should be
Hmm.
okay with this now. And then when it comes back, and I would imagine in a marriage that chronic grief part doesn't always mesh up the same time. So,
Right.
Rarely, I would
It's
say.
very complex.
yeah. So when it
Yeah.
doesn't, how can you support each other with that?
I think one of the biggest things we've found is a foundational level of trust with each other. That once we dealt with kind of the initial grief and working through that and embracing our life as it was, we made a commitment to each other to do this together.
Mhm.
And so when those moments come along, now we have this history of trust with one another that just
Mhm.
started with one simple action of committing to each other, and then daily, monthly,
Hmm.
Mhm.
throughout time, building this level of trust that we can share these kind of things with our partner. That I can share them with Kristen. I don't have to worry that she's going to think less of me
Right.
because of something I'm feeling. So it's opened the doors to be able to share that grief with one another, knowing that the other person is going to listen to it and may not understand it,
Mhm.
but it will listen and try to be there and supportive of the other person. So that foundational trust in one another is huge. So that's one thing. That trust also allows us to be able to share it, to just be able to get it out there, even if it's tough.
It's easy to avoid, for sure. You
Yeah.
have very limited time together. Do you really want to spend it this way with that kind of heavy. And then for me, it was learning that this was normal for me
Yeah.
to experience this and be
Mhm.
willing to, one, acknowledge my
Yeah.
emotions and validate them, and be willing to process them. I think a
Yeah.
lot of times we just avoid
Yeah.
processing it. And so I had to learn, okay, this is a trigger for me. I'm taking her to this appointment and it's going to be hard.
Mhm.
And so then the other piece is being willing to share with your spouse, hey, I have this appointment and I feel like in the past these have really triggered a wave of grief. And so Todd, I had shared and he has learned my triggers. He
Mhm.
knew that eighth grade graduation was going to be really hard for me emotionally. And so he would
Yeah.
pat me on the leg and,
Mm.
um, just to me know that he knew
Yeah.
it was hard. And so it's being willing, which Todd did not in the beginning. He was in total denial, which is
Mhm.
common, which is one of the emotions of the grief for us. And being willing to acknowledge those emotions, process them, and share them, like he said. And that is just a critical piece in these marriages.
We
Yeah.
found that if you don't share them, if you keep it, quote unquote bottled up or avoid it, you want to spend our time talking about these sad things or these grief aspects. Let's try to do other things. But you find that if you don't deal with them, if you don't talk about them, it's like a overcast sky that just clouds up all of your life, and you're not able to do other things as well and to enjoy other things as well. So we found just getting them out there, being willing to talk about them and share them, opened us up to live more fully the rest of our time.
And deeper intimacy.
Hmm.
That's you can achieve that level of intimacy that we don't think you can any other way.
Yeah.
Even if we're in different, he may not be in a wave of grief, I may be in anger, we're in different waves, different times, and just accepting we're going to grieve differently, and that's expected.
So another thing I underlined several times in your book was about the validation piece. To me, it sounds like men and women sometimes do validation differently. So in your marriage, Todd, was that something, a skill you had to learn as far as what Kristen needed to hear when she was talking to
Yes.
you? Because
Yeah, yeah.
this was my marriage. That's why I underlined it so many times. I was like, oh, this is our marriage. That I might say something, and then my husband, he he did respond in the way like a man would, and I'm like, I need to hear these certain things. So,
Hmm. I'd say I was pretty bad at validation.
mm.
Bad.
um, and I probably honestly, in the beginning, before I learned better, just probably did the opposite of validation,
Mhm.
Yeah.
not intentionally, but just saying, just get over this.
Mhm.
We don't have time to feel that. Um, just get over it and
You don't need counseling.
take care of what you need to.
Yeah.
We got to take care of our family, and our other stuff doesn't matter.
Mhm.
So yeah, just really did not get that concept or understand it, until really it was just like we said, just in a broken place.
Mhm.
And Kristen was just so distraught and just struggling to get through every day at
Yeah.
that point, and just could barely function on a day-to-day basis.
Mhm.
I realized how much it wasn't just me that
Mhm.
put her in that place. It was other
Yeah.
things too, but I was a
Yeah.
contributing factor to it. And so
Yeah.
for me, that was the point where I realized, something, I got to change that. I can't keep doing this. And so then we just had to start having, it took a while to build trust again, start
Mhm.
asking her,
I had
um,
shut down.
asking her how can I help you? What can I
Yeah.
do?
Yeah.
And it took a while before she believed me and was willing to share some of those things. But then when she would share them, then I would try to do those.
Yeah.
Um,
Very rotely, I would have a really hard day after an appointment or
Yeah.
something, and he would try to fix it. And, he's an engineer, and he'd be
Yeah.
like, you know, "What can I do her medicines? Can I?" And I said, "This is where I need you to say, it sounds like you've had a hard day.
Yeah.
I'm sorry you're feeling so sad." Literally. And it was rote,
and that's exactly the words I would say back, almost recite.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a
like a robot
words.
so much, but
But it was, I truly felt it, but didn't always know how to ask it or to
Yeah.
do. And my natural inclination, like she said, was to fix things. You had a rough appointment with it. Well, what was wrong with it? How can we help that situation?
Does she need
And
more PT? Does she?
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah.
just like,
and so I was jump into fix it mode and
Yeah.
didn't realize that that's not what she needed. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I really had to learn those cues, and she had to be kind of
very vulnerable.
that touch point of saying, I need this, and speaking
Mhm.
up for herself, self-advocating for that till I started to learn those cues and how to do that better.
And it wasn't so much he began to learn, it
Yeah.
was that he was willing to be teachable and try to figure out what I needed. That
Yeah.
meant more and began to build more trust than him. Literally, it took him years to get to
Yeah.
the point where he's like, that sounds hard. I'm like, wow, thanks for
Yeah.
validating me, and
Yeah.
just
That's why I wanted to talk about this, because I think this is so common in all marriages, really, but especially needed when you have additional needs. But when I was reading that part about you were saying, this is what I need you to say, and then he did it and he was willing to do it. Like, I underline that so many times because I see that in my own marriage with my husband is also a fixer. And I would imagine that research would support that men tend to be more of a fixer and women more of the processing feelings. But I just thought this was really important for people who are in a situation where they feel like their spouse maybe doesn't understand what they need. I thought it was so important that you told him, and Todd, that you listened. And even if it did take you a long time, to me, that would be almost like a turning point in a marriage.
We came up with a phrase that we really think, if you could learn one phrase to help
Yeah.
with this, it's that sounds hard. How
Yeah.
can I help? That's a generic phrase
Love it.
that puts in both the validation and feeling piece
Hmm.
and the fix it piece. And it
Hmm.
allows the person that you say it to, if I say it to Kristen, that sounds hard. How can I help? She can jump into whatever aspect of it is that she needs. Some days she
Yeah.
needs me to fix something.
yeah.
And
Right.
so the how can I help jumps
Yeah.
into do this. But with a, that sounds hard, it automatically validates as well. So that's one thing we encourage couples, just that simple phrase or something similar
Mhm.
to it, that it allows just that openness to kind of bridge the gap between the two of you and allow the other person to respond in the way they need help.
But what we found in the research, actually,
Yeah.
which we had this aha moment when we went away to work on the book, I never wanted solutions. I
Hmm.
just wanted emotional validation. He never
Right.
wanted emotional validation. But we both need both, especially special needs parents. We
Yeah.
really both need both. And so I began to be willing to realize, okay, and maybe he's really good at solutions. After he validated me,
Hmm.
maybe I should let him work on a solution. And that
Yeah.
has made us so much stronger to be able, because we need both.
And then it's like, ooh,
Yeah.
something I can fix. I want to do
Yeah.
that. Let me do that.
Yeah.
I can
I
do
like
that.
I
So
love it. Well, I just thought, wow, this is what people need to hear, because this is so important. And I think that we get frustrated sometimes, probably men and women, when our needs aren't automatically met or our spouse doesn't understand what we need. And I think so often we shut down at that point thinking
Mhm.
like, well, they should know. But I think most times people don't, and you have to
Right.
really work together to learn it. So I loved that part of the book. Underline, underline, underline. So, for some people listening today, they may not have children who have disabilities. So, what would you want them to know? Why is there more strain on a marriage when there are additional needs?
Everything is so much more complex and stressful.
just take the simple example of going to church. Typical family, they may struggle to get out the door and get everybody ready, get hair done, dressed, and everybody in the car.
Hmm.
And that is a lot of stress for oftentimes for families. But for us going to church, there's a whole other criteria of things that we're looking at. We're packing diaper bags
Yeah.
because our daughter's still a 2 year
And
old, not
medicines.
potty trained. We
Hmm.
may need medicines while we're out, so we have to review the medicines that we have in the bag. We have sensory toys potentially, or other things to keep them occupied so that they're not yelling during the service, and
Right.
try to plan out a whole repertoire of activities for the entire time. And then we finally, get on the orthotics and the shoes and
the hearing
aids and the glasses and all those. And then we get to the car, and then there's a special seat belting system that just takes more time to connect up and to do, make sure the wheelchair's packed, get everything in there. And then finally hit the road, get to church.
Try to find a handicap spot.
Yeah, try to find that. Hope there's something there because we're not too late to have missed them all already.
Right.
And get out the wheelchair, get to the door. Hopefully there's a way to open it easily and get through and navigate crowds and get around and
through the crowd.
Find a seat that is near the back, so in case we have to run out.
It has space on the end of the aisle, wheelchair.
Yeah.
So those are all the...
Well, and you didn't talk about the meltdowns.
But yeah,
we could have a meltdown in the midst of trying to get her out the door. And
so that's just one simple scenario in a day of what kind of difference in the strain that can be there for a family. And you magnify those and multiply those for every single thing during the day. And it is stressful and strainful for these families and these
couples.
Then
on the marriage, we could be arguing by the time we get out the door because it's like, so every little thing is so much more complex, takes so much more time, more money, more energy. And then you got the anxiety with the church, the anxiety going into the church. Are people going to welcome us? Is she going to have a meltdown? And, we're going to have to find the bathroom really quickly. So there's just that anxiety piece that by the time you get to church, you're exhausted.
Yeah.
And then you may not get that connection with other families and other people like a typical family would.
So what we would tell ministry leaders and other people is, it's messy, and you're going to have to get to know us to understand what's going on in our life.
And it takes time.
That's just our family. Every family is different, and their needs are unique. But do something simple, coordinate getting a meal to us, or just connect with, help us in some way that gives us a little more free time so that we can take care of all these extra things that we have going on. And then as you get to know us and we start to trust that you really do care, because we meet so many people in life that seem to care and are nice when you first meet them, but then you start to share your life, they're like, whoa, I can't deal with that. That's too much.
Yeah.
But if we see that you're willing to be a part of our lives, to accept us as who we are, mess and everything, then we're going to start to open up more, be willing to share some things and ways that you might be able to help us, able to find ways to get involved and hopefully not just receive from the church, but find ways that we can give back too. There's some unique ways that can happen in a synergy that can develop when you have both sides really trying to understand the other better.
So it sounds like it's a lot about building relationship.
Individual, because disability ministries are really important to provide that place where parents can worship together, the child can interact, even a support group is critical. But what we found is it's the individual church members and using their gifts and passions that really is where the families connect and feel that support.
So speaking of the extra stress that comes with parenting a child with disabilities, what are some tips you can give couples as they try to navigate this?
Take some deep breaths, do things to de-stress in the midst of trying to tackle things.
Yeah, one thing we found is there's not enough time in the day to do everything that you have to do. So find ways to gain more time. One way that we suggest doing it is getting more organized. If you end up spending all this time trying to find things, trying to coordinate things, you'll never get to the more important things on a daily basis. So things like sit down and schedule things and say, all right, what's going on this week? What appointments? Where do you need me? And we just sit down and we knock it all out in 10, 20 minutes, 30 minutes maybe, looking ahead for the week. And so rather than getting into every day and then saying, oh, you didn't tell me about this appointment, I've got to go to work, I can't do that,
and spending that time every morning.
By doing it ahead of time, you can condense the amount of time needed for it, reduce the amount of stress, and be more efficient and effective throughout the week. So little things like that can build in time. And then as Kristin said, definitely finding those ways to de-stress.
The more healthy we are individually and the lower our stress levels, the healthier our marriage.
Mhm.
And that is so, so true. And so de-stressing individually and as a couple, which requires getting out of the house
Okay.
together, which can
Yeah.
feel impossible, but especially for the wife, it's critical to get out of the house together at least for a couple hours every couple of weeks. That
Yeah.
can feel impossible, but that just it gives you that breather,
Mhm.
and you can have that time to just connect. We make a rule, unless we
Mhm.
absolutely have to talk about something with the kids. We don't talk about the kids.
Yeah.
We just connect. So yeah, but it's the little things, getting all the details taken care of so that we can have that 10-minute check-in every day with each other.
Yeah.
Or have time to hug and kiss in the morning, and we're not like, I have to take her to this. And
Mm.
instead of doing that in the morning, we're able to say good morning and
Mm.
have that more pleasant.
We'll go back to what we said earlier. This was a years long process.
Yeah.
So don't feel like you have to make all these changes and do all these things right away. It's
Mhm.
about doing one thing
Mhm.
Mhm.
and choosing one thing to help improve one thing in your life. And as you see the results of it, then you
Yeah.
can start building in the others, because you one, create more energy and positive attitude about it, but you also
Yeah.
create a little bit more time to have room and space to do other things and add them in.
Mhm.
So start with something small,
Baby step.
baby step it.
Mhm.
Um, it'll build, and all of a sudden you'll look back a few years later and realize how far you've come.
So if you're in a marriage and one of you has realized, hey, we really need to be more intentional about this, what is a good first step in like approaching your spouse?
I think piggybacking off of Todd, what we found in research is
Mhm.
actually one little positive interaction, just
Okay.
building a couple more, which parents who have special needs children actually have less positive interactions
Mhm.
than other couples.
Mhm.
You have to have, this is John Gottman, I'm quoting here.
Yeah.
So I'll give him credit.
Uh-huh.
Um, you Couples need 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative
Mhm.
interactions in order to be happy
Mhm.
and satisfied in their marriage. Well, we get less opportunities to do that,
Mhm.
and we have more negative, stressful interactions.
Right.
On average, parents who have children with autism who are doing well, only have 3 positive interactions for every negative.
Mhm.
So, in order to this was a huge concept,
Yeah.
as I researched this. So, in order to start to build that positive momentum in your relationship and that trust, just just intentionally adding in one little positive interaction more throughout the day. Like, um, texting Todd to say, "Hey, I hope your morning's going well. Is everything okay?" And trying to talk maybe 2 minutes over lunchtime. That builds a positive interaction,
Mhm.
that starts to fuel a positive cycle.
Yeah, just you find those little things that you can't, even if you're struggling and fighting with each other, there's always something positive you can find to say. That I enjoyed that meal. Thanks for spending the time that way.
Yeah.
Those are positive interactions. Or you really interacted with our son or our daughter. Great today. It was
Yeah.
fun to see you laughing together.
Mhm.
And you be intentional for looking for those things, because they're there. Because of the love you have for your kids, the love you have for each other, there's going to be chances and opportunities to find positive things that are happening, and you just got to be like a detective on the lookout for them,
Mhm.
and then say them.
Yeah.
And so that will really help to get the ball rolling and start to build a new culture in your marriage.
Even if your spouse isn't on board, we joke, we think this book, a lot of wives are going to pick it up
Yeah.
and start to read it and be like, "Hey, we need to go through this together." And the husband's going to be like, "Yeah, right. Todd would not have picked this book up 14
Yeah.
years ago." But even if, and it could be the other way around, let's say the husband starts reading this book and the wife's not on board, and he's like,
Right.
"Okay, well, I'm going to start to implement some of these things."
Mhm.
And it will start to impact the marriage. Even
Mhm.
if the other spouse is not aware of what's going on, it's these little things will start to get this positive momentum going in the marriage.
Yeah, I noticed that as I was reading your book. That's one of the reasons I'm so excited about it because for those of you who haven't bought this book yet, go buy it on Amazon and all the places, but go buy it. But it really, you talk about concepts that are like, I call them light bulb concepts. Like, I had
Mhm.
not thought of it that way. And then you give like some places to actually reflect on your own life, where you are and what you can do. And I did notice that because I thought, even if it's only starting with one spouse, you can
Mhm.
get the ball rolling. I thought I mean, bravo to you guys. This is an excellent book that I really think can really get things started on the right path.
Thank you, Barb. We hope it's extremely helpful for couples because we don't want them to suffer like we did.
It is. I mean, I just reflected a lot again, back to my childhood, watching my parents not have any resources. And so many of the concepts in this book, really, they're simple. That's what I love about this
Mhm.
book is like, it's almost like reframing things and seeing it in a new way. And
Mhm.
once you do, it makes sense and there are steps you can take. And I think a lot of times when we are in a situation that feels overwhelming, we assume that the things that will help will be overwhelming too, but they're
Mhm.
not always like that.
Yeah, parents don't have time
No.
to read a book and have to figure out how to apply it.
Yeah,
So we wanted to make it really, really easy to get started.
you did. I can't say enough. Go buy this book. Churches buy the book because you're going to have couples who are going to come in who are going to need it. And if you are a parent of a child with any kind of a disability, doesn't matter how big, how small, in between, it will affect your marriage. And I think this book it's a tool that you need. Speaking to churches, you kind of hit on this earlier, but a lot of times when you do have these additional needs in your marriage and then you go to church or you go to a marriage conference, it doesn't always feel like it speaks to you. So if you are a pastor and you have a couple with a child with special needs come in for marital counseling, what should they know?
It's really complicated. It's not just let's grow your faith together and pray more, which is very critical because these couples go through special spiritual crises
Mhm.
together. There's a deeper, I went through a spiritual crisis of how could God be good and allow our children to suffer? There's just all that. There's also a component where 1 in 3 have depression and anxiety, these
Mhm.
parents, or
Yeah.
post-traumatic stress. And so it's not a short-term meet a couple times and then their marriage is going to be okay. It's a wraparound support of they probably do need more intense marital counseling or mental health and coordinating with those relationships with therapists in the area to
Mhm.
have that for couples. And it's more intentional support of having the church wrap around and giving these couples space to have some time together, space to be able to worship together. It's not
Mhm.
just a simple meet for pastoral counseling and that's going to fix everything. It's
Right.
much more complex than
Yeah,
that.
and the issues often will be beyond the scope of a pastoral
Yes.
counseling. And
Yep.
that's why Kristen was saying really to partner with
Mhm.
other therapists and people in the area
Mhm.
to help as an overall
Hmm.
strategy for helping these couples and these families. But at the same time, don't just push them off to another therapist.
Right.
They
Right.
need your spiritual guidance. They need
Yeah.
your life support. You're alongside with them. They're your congregants alongside with them to support
Mhm.
them in that day to day, week to week struggles that they're going through.
Mhm.
Mental health alone is not going to solve their problem. Is not going to bring them to a better place. It takes both. So it's
Yeah.
really
Hmm.
being that way to coordinate and be a central place for them to find the help they need.
And
Yeah.
they may not be able to afford therapy,
Mhm.
and or have the childcare to go to therapy. So
Mhm.
it's just there's so many ways these families and couples need support in every area in order to be able to invest in their marriage.
Mhm. So what I'm hearing you say is the church should really do what they do well, which is
Hmm.
Mhm.
supporting families. And if you're a pastor and you really don't have any experience with disability, then if you can help them find an area counselor that does, it's okay to say, we support you going here. But then in the meantime, be there for the spiritual support.
Hmm.
And I'm going to
Hmm.
imagine too that as a pastor coming into this, there needs to be a lot more listening than talking, especially in the beginning. Is that true?
Less advice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause
Like,
We
yeah.
get we get advice all the time,
And
Yeah.
and
invalidation
most advice is often hurtful or
or
demeaning or
judgmental.
judgmental. Um, are just, we've heard it so many times. It's God would never give you more than you could bear.
Right.
And
God only gives special kids to special
yeah,
parents.
and
Yeah.
those are more hurtful than helpful.
Yeah.
But it's the people, that the pastors that have come in and said, tell me more
Mhm.
about what your day is like.
Yeah.
Share with me some of the things that are challenging for you.
How
Yeah.
can I support you spiritually?
Mhm.
Being willing, yeah, because oftentimes we're not willing to bring up the spiritual things, or we don't even realize that they're there in the depths.
Oh, yeah.
And we're not self-aware of it at all. And a pastor that's willing to ask and kind of shoot that arrow through to the heart of, how are you doing spiritually?
Yeah.
That's an appropriate
And
question.
not jumping to, I think churches are doing very well with not jumping to, well, your faith is weak or you're sinning by questioning God, but just that listening
Mhm.
and supporting and allowing them to process, maybe sharing scripture on,
Mhm.
grieving and with Job, crying out to God. But just really listening and just sitting there with the couple
Mhm.
and just being there for them
Mhm.
because we're going to spill our guts.
Yeah.
Sitting there, letting us know you're there for us, you're there with us through this.
You don't have to fix it.
No, please don't try to fix it.
You
Yeah.
can find ways to help us, but
Yeah.
but first we want to be heard, and to
Yeah.
share some of those things, and
Yeah.
just to be comforted.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking as we were talking about this, going back to our first conversation about the difference like with men and women and the fix it versus the listening. And I think churches have an opportunity for both because
Mhm.
definitely in the spiritual support, there's a lot of listening and validating and learning.
Mhm.
But churches are good at fixing some things. They are good at like,
Mhm.
I can watch your kids while you go to counseling, or
Mhm.
we can bring you meals, or those practical things, and those are important too. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for churches to help.
And sometimes people in churches don't know how to help and they're
Mhm.
scared they're going to say the wrong thing or it
Yeah.
feels nebulous. The littlest thing that can take stress off.
Hmm.
Literally, one of the biggest gifts would be bringing a meal that's
Hmm.
allergy free or
Hmm.
sensory, that's even just bringing a meal is complicated. Sitting with the child
Hmm.
or children, you may need two people to come sit with children. So the couple can sit on the front porch and eat a meal together.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the biggest gift. One of the biggest gifts you can give a couple
Hmm.
and mow their lawn.
Yeah.
Not at the same time, but just any little thing that can take stress off and give them even 30 minutes together is huge.
How loved does that make a couple feel by their church? Just those small things.
Oh, incredibly. And it gives you hope. It gives you this sense of you're not alone.
Mhm.
Um, when our church just insisted they were going to do something when Bethany Grace was little, it
Mhm.
helped us feel like, okay, we're not alone in this. People care for us. And then they practically help save our
Yeah.
marriage.
Yeah, even the simple thing of, Kristen could not go out to basically
Mhm.
at all. She had to
Yeah.
quit her job, be full-time caregiver at home.
Beth was medically
The only
fragile.
time out was to go to doctor's appointments, therapists, things like that. So even just the person showing up to drop a meal off and to say hi helped her to feel less isolated,
Mhm.
to know that there was a world out there that knew more about and cared about what was going on in her life and in that home, even though she was away
And
from
understood
them.
that we couldn't come over for a play date.
Yeah.
People would be like, why can't you bring Bethany for a play date? Well, she's hooked up to 4 machines.
Yeah.
So, and then we had a woman in the church offer to come sit and rock Beth so I
Mhm.
could take a nap in a shower.
Yeah.
And that helped lower my stress so much. It's just those little, if someone in the church gives a very specific way, because if you ask us, how can we help? We're going to be so overwhelmed. We can't even tell you. But if they
Right.
say, hey, I'm going to the grocery store,
Uh-huh.
can I bring you some groceries?
Yeah.
And we're going to say no 3 times.
Uh-huh.
But just keep insisting. No, really, I really mean this. I really want to do this. Any little gesture that someone makes means the world to us.
I think just going back to the pastoral role
Mhm.
and all this too, I really feel healthy congregations and good pastors know their congregation and their members. They know their gifts, they know their skills, they
Mhm.
know their interest. So to be able to be that facilitator between other people, that oftentimes we're lucky to make it to church in the back and probably will have to leave early. So
Mhm.
we're likely not going to meet people. We're not
No.
going to find those people that might want to help us or that have a skill set that would really be beneficial to us. But a pastor, knowing their congregants, oftentimes they'll know someone that they can reach out to and say, hey, why don't you try calling them? Or they can make the first step and they can call and say, hey, I've got a family that needs this specific thing. I know you love, like for instance, we had a ramp building ministry that started in our church for trying to build ramps. So they had this group of men that just loved to build and would go on mission
Yeah.
trips and things like that. And the
Yeah.
pastor was like, somebody got the idea of let's start building ramps for these people that get
Wheelchairs.
wheelchairs
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
can't get up into their homes anymore. And so the pastor said, called them and said, hey, we need this, can you do it? And they ended up launching this huge ministry that lots of men got involved in
Yeah.
building and doing, and it's just so great when the body of Christ works together for things like that. And that's where a pastor can be that facilitator and connect those needs to the people that care and want to do them but
Mhm.
don't always realize what's out there and what they can do, but they'd love to do it if they knew.
Yeah, I think churches feel like maybe they're not equipped to
Yeah.
support families with special needs. But
Mhm.
I believe God has given us all gifts and talents to care
Mhm.
for the body of Christ.
Yeah.
And, just thinking outside the box that, yeah, there are people in the church that
Mhm.
can provide what this family needs because God has given
Mhm.
the church the people with the gifts and the talents and the heart and the passion for these. It's just a matter, like Todd said, getting people connected.
Do you want to speak a little bit about how your faith has impacted your marriage and your journey?
That is what kept us together. We use the imagery in the book of the three cords are not easily broken. We felt like we were both hanging from a rope, and my faith was shattered. I felt like I was barely hanging on. Todd was just trying to get through ministry. We did not have, I mean, we did. The Lord was always there. Um, but that is, I truly believe it's only by God's grace that I'm still alive and our marriage is as strong as it is today. And we do, I believe I definitely have a deeper faith after everything I've gone through with this grief and suffering. And, we actually had someone ask us if we would write the book from a secular perspective.
Mhm.
So it would be published by a secular publisher and be in the general market and probably sell a lot better.
Yeah.
And we prayed about it and we're like, no, we can't.
Yeah.
That that is the core piece of our story. It is the core piece of what holds couples together.
Right.
And we just said no.
Yeah, I think specifically one way I grew in my faith through it
Yeah.
was it took a while, but realized that I had to have faith in God to take care of Kristen. That I could not be everything that she needed, and that's a hard thing to feel as a husband that wants to make things right, to fix things, to make everything perfect. Um, but I had to kind of release that and trust God. She was in such a bad place for so long. And there was literally, I had to come to the point where I knew I could not help her get out of that pit. And my only choice was to have faith in him and to pray for that and allow him to come alongside and love her through people, through therapists, through friends. I would do everything I could to do my part, so to speak. But I didn't feel guilty that I couldn't do everything. And so having that faith that God was supporting her individually and us together to get through this was a huge piece.
And I think at times I just could not find the love in my heart. I was so angry and hurt by Todd. I literally had to pray for God to give me his love for Todd. And I think, there's points where couples are so desperate and hurt. It's like I don't even feel like I have the strength to love my spouse.
Mhm.
But God's love is there. And it's ultimately God's love in a marriage. And so just praying for God to fill, each other with his love for each other.
Thank you for sharing that. That is one powerful prayer. If there's one thing you could leave with parents of children with disabilities who are maybe struggling in their marriage or realize, like, yeah, we really need to start being more intentional, what do you want them to know?
We use the phrase, think the best of one another. Todd's mom used to say that. And I think it really has to start from that place because we really weren't thinking the best of one another 14 years ago. And I think couples can't move forward together really unless they re-look at their wedding vows, now knowing what those mean, and not being on the fence of, are we going to stay together? Are we not? But committing to, we don't know how we're going to do this. We're not even wanting to be in the same room, but we're committing to staying together, recommitting to our wedding vows, and going to move forward together. And then it's just taking those one little tiny step, pick one little tiny thing in the book to start taking those steps together.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. That is the biggest thing is what she said. Just to decide and commit to doing it together. That we don't know how this is going to work out. We don't know what's going to happen, but let's try to figure something out together.
We're sticking it through together.
Yeah, that's important. Can you tell us where we can find your resources?
Yeah, so disabilityparenting.com. We have a blog with over 50 articles. We have tons of free resources you can download, including Baker Books has provided the first chapter of our book that you can actually read for free. We have a page of resources where links to respite care grants, online support groups, just tons, mental health resources. We just try to provide as much as we don't have everything, for every disorder, but as many support resources for mental health and faith and marriage.
Well, thank you guys so much for coming. I cannot say again how much I love your book and how excited I am that this resource is out there for families and for churches. And just thank you for all that you're doing to help strengthen marriages.
Thank you so much, Barb.
To learn more from Todd and Kristin, check out their website at disabilityparenting.com and buy their book, How to Build a Thriving Marriage as You Care for Children with Disabilities, available on Amazon. And don't forget, if you like this podcast, please follow us and share with others. We'll see you next time.